Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting organized by Civita and the EU Delegation to Norway. And also a warm welcome. I need some more light, please, in order to see what I'm going to say. A warm welcome to all watching us on stream. And my name is Mathilde Fasting and I will be today's moderator together with my colleague here, Jan Erik Grindheim. Our guest today is the EU Commissioner for Economy, who previously served as Prime Minister of Italy, Paolo Gentiloni. The Commissioner will discuss questions related to Europe's economic future, such as how will the economy of the EU develop in the future? What role does the geopolitical situation play in the EU's development? And how does the EU view cooperation with Norway? Before we start, I'll go through a few practical details. After the introduction and a moderated Q&A, you will have the possibility to ask questions or give short comments. They should be clearly phrased in English, of course. We have a microphone and my colleague will bring it to you. Present yourself, and as we are live streaming, please try to speak clearly. It's important for the sound. It's also possible for you to share your thoughts or ask questions on Twitter or X with CivitaKveld as a hashtag, but please make sure that your phones are on silent mode. We will end this session no later than 4:30 p.m. and we will ask you to stay until we're finished. And now, a warm welcome to the EU Commissioner for Economy, Paolo Gentiloni. È un grande piacere di averlo qui.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Grazie mille. Good afternoon. God ettermiddag. It's a pleasure to be in Oslo and in this distinguished venue, in this hotel. Now I have a confession to make. I'm afraid I do not recall exactly where I was when Oddvar Brag broke his pole. But more seriously, much more seriously, I certainly remember where I was exactly 40 years later when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, bringing war back on our continent after decades of hard-won peace. The world changed on that day. For Europe and US, it certainly shattered the political illusion we cultivated after the collapse of the Soviet Union that normalizing relations with Russia was possible through economic cooperation. And from an economic perspective for the EU, and especially for Germany and Central EU member states, the result for a time was access to plentiful and cheap Russian gas. This is not the situation anymore. The Kremlin decision to cut gas supplies to the EU set off a chain reaction, the effects of which we are still feeling today. In the second half of last year, skyrocketing energy prices brought inflation rates to their highest level in decades, and our economy is on the brink of recession. Last winter, we managed to avert more catastrophic scenarios like blackouts or bankruptcies waves. Our citizens and businesses went to enormous lengths to lower their consumption. Our common policy response helped to keep prices in check after a few months of hikes, support households and firms, and diversifies gas supplies. And EU cooperation with Norway was crucial in this respect. I will return to this later. We avoided the worst. Still, after 2 years of strong post-pandemic rebound in 21 and 22, the European economy lost momentum this year. Growth has been feeble in all the 3 quarters, weighed down by tighter monetary policy, lower consumption, and weak external demand. Our latest economic forecast, which I presented last week, sees GDP expanding by only 0.6% this year, and then pick up at 1.2, 1.3 next year. Against this backdrop, the policy recommendation I presented earlier this week have called for two things, above all, in the European Union. First, governments to adopt coordinated, prudent fiscal policies, starting with the winding down of energy support measures. This is essential to improve the sustainability of public finances and support the ECB effort to stamp out inflation, and therefore help households recover purchasing power. Second, for governments to ensure high and sustained levels of investments, both public and private. There is only an apparent contradiction here. Pursuing prudent fiscal policies means focusing on improving the composition of public finances, making them more growth-friendly. Maintaining high investment levels in our common priorities, especially in the green and digital transition, goes in this direction. And I'm encouraged by the fact that all EU member states plan to preserve nationally financed public investment next year, on top of the investment support we are providing as EU with this common program, Next Generation EU. And this level of investment is in stark contrast to the substantial cuts to investment we saw in the wake of the financial crisis 12 years ago. The point is, we need both stability and growth. This is one of the key objectives, by the way, of the ongoing discussions that are very passionate in the EU on the reform of our fiscal rules, discussions that are now entering a crucial phase in which we hope to see conclude with an agreement by the end of this year. Looking ahead, we should not be resigned to a new period of low for long when it comes to the growth of the European economy. We must respond to the multiple challenges we are facing. The first thing to do is to recognize that Europe needs a new business model. Our industry is facing structurally higher energy prices. Around the world, big players are turning to more activist industrial policies, especially in the field of clean tech manufacturing, free trade and globalization, on which the EU built its prosperity, is entering in a new phase. All these elements are combining to put huge pressure on our competitiveness. How Europe responds to these challenges will define its future prosperity. We must step up our game. Europe cannot remain the only herbivore in a world of carnivores. More concretely, this means changing our energy model and turbocharging the clean industrial transition. The EU is a world leader when it comes to putting in place green targets, regulations, and standards. And over the last few years, we have a lot to show for it. The European Green Deal, which set the direction of travel, which we enshrined in a climate law, what we call the Fit for 55 package, one of the most ambitious and far-reaching legislative packages ever adopted at EU level. And we introduced also a carbon border adjustment mechanism, the first jurisdiction to do so. But we cannot afford to fall behind in developing the clean technology solutions that will power the transition in wind, solar, hydrogen, and batteries. This is more than an environmental necessity or a geopolitical imperative, even though those are very good reasons to begin with. Our future growth prospects, job creation, and industrial competitiveness are at stake. We need reforms to speed up permitting procedures, remove red tape, and boost skills. But we also need massive investments in research, innovation, and infrastructure. We have estimated at 650 billion euros the annual additional investments needed up to 2030 for the green and digital transition. The majority of this funding will, of course, have to come from the private sector. But the public sector has a key role to play in providing right framework and complementing this funding and channeling it into our common goals. The EU, as you know, has put on the table unprecedented resources for the green transition, almost 500 billion euros up to 2027, and this is good news. And we are encouraging member states to make the most of all the common tools. But our competitiveness challenge does not end in 2027. As we look ahead, Europe must think about setting common objectives and common projects that will be financed jointly. We must finance projects for which a European scale with 450 million consumers represents an advantage, projects of common interest for Europeans. We will not win the race for competitiveness with regulations only. If we look at our competitors around the world, we see that they are no less indebted than the Europeans, and their support for the industry is higher than ours. For instance, the support measures that the US put forward in the Inflation Reduction Act have the merit for businesses of being quite simple, and they are not capped. I'm not saying we should adopt the American model, and of course our differences with China are crystal clear. But we cannot sit idly by. Europeans should react as much as possible together. In this more fragmented geopolitical landscape, we must not seek protectionism or deglobalization, but we should abandon the idea of a globalization that consists only in looking for the place where this or that component or factor of production is the cheapest. This is no longer possible. We need to strengthen our ties with our like-minded partners and make our value chains shorter and more secure. And this brings me, in conclusion, to our relation with Norway. Norway, as you know, is one of the EU's closest and most valued partners. We have strong trade links, of course, with the EEA agreement as the basis for our excellent cooperation for almost 30 years now. But our relationship goes deeper. It is based on a common heritage and history, on our shared fundamental values of freedom, democracy, rule of law, on our commitment to the rule-based international order. We are not just good neighbors and partners, we are allies and friends. Over the last few years, our relationship has grown stronger. During the pandemic, we worked together to secure equitable access to vaccines. Since last year, we have been standing together in support of Ukraine and against Russia's invasion. And I do not need to tell you what a profound impact that invasion has had on the security architecture of the Nordic region, with Finland's recent and Sweden's, I hope, imminent accession to NATO, and Denmark's referendum to join the EU common security and defense policy. If the EU managed in a matter of months to massively cut its reliance on Russian fossil fuels, it is thanks to our increased cooperation. Norway has become the EU's top gas provider, supplying more than 40% of pipeline gas needs to the EU. We also share a commitment to working together on a clean energy transition. The Green Alliance we established earlier this year is a strong signal in this sense. And this is about enhancing industrial cooperation, partnering on sustainable raw materials and batteries value chains, accelerating the decarbonization of our economies. And I'm here in Norway to show that we continue to strengthen our cooperation with Norway's participation in the InvestEU program. Norway will now be able to finance important projects, both at home and cross-border, with InvestEU support. So at a time of geopolitical tensions and uncertainty, it is crucial to remain united. While there may on occasion be policy differences, what unites us is much stronger. We must continue to nurture this relationship and work on our common goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gentiloni. You mentioned the international rule-based order. In 2015-16, world trade was all-time high, and many multilateral trade agreements were negotiated, for instance, the TTIP between the US and the EU. Then came Donald Trump in the US and Brexit between the UK and the EU. And suddenly no one cared about multilateralism anymore. Still last year, world trade was almost as high as in 2015-16. Does this mean that we don't really need a well-functioning global free trade system based on multilateral agreements?
Indeed, I think the answer is yes. Yes, we need international trade. We need globalization. I don't think, as you know, there is a lot of conversation on the end of globalization, deglobalization, slow globalization, etc. Of course, there is merit in all this conversation, and the merit is that partially triggered by the war in Ukraine, the message was very clear on the fact that a golden era of globalization, looking for the cheapest price all over the world, despite any concern on security of supplies, etc. This era is finished. But at the same time, I think that the end of globalization will not happen, and all the messages on what we called decoupling are unrealistic. I don't think it's only a mistake, the theory of decoupling, meaning of having two separate globalization, if you want. But it is not only a mistake, it's impossible. Yeah. Trade relation between US and China increased in the last years, despite tensions, geopolitical tensions. So I think the message that we try to give with this de-risking and not decoupling, of course, it's only a sentence. It has to be a little bit more articulated, but it is the right message to give.
You also said in your little talk now, lifelong value and shorter distances for trade and for value chains and so forth. Could you expand a bit on that?
Well, I think, of course, for us, Europeans, the lesson came in February 2022, because this was the symbol of the end of a period of great illusion, probably. It is quite diffused the idea that this illusion was a German illusion, no? Because there was also a German sentence, no? The Wandel durch Handel. But indeed, it was a European, and not only European, illusion. We should not forget that the G8 was there, and Russia was part of the G8. So the idea of economic relations changing substantially our relation with Russia was so strong. So what happened with the invasion of Ukraine, of course, had an enormous economic impact. And now we know that we need to diversify and secure our supply chains, especially supply of energy. Of course, we know we need renewables, we need to change our energy mix, but we need also, in the transition period, to have secure supply chains of energy. And I'm sure, for example, that Norway is working a lot to make its own pipes and infrastructure secure, which is, in the world we are in, an important target.
Last year, as you mentioned also, the Joe Biden administration launched its Inflation Reduction Act to lower inflation and provide the US contribution to fighting climate change. So far, the EU has, as you also mentioned, reacted by adapting its state aid rules and the legislative proposals of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. Do you think this is the right way to go? Or is there a chance for the world's super trading powers to be dragged into a subsidy trap in this case?
Well, the IRA works. It is a mechanism of tax credits, rather simple. And it is not capped, meaning that when it was launched, I think the idea of the Treasury was of a volume of around 400 billion, and several estimates are now assessing that we are around 1 trillion, so 3 times the initial estimate. The EU reaction, I wouldn't describe the EU action as a reaction to the IRA, because if we are honest, we should recognize the fact that before the IRA was decided, and for a completely different circumstance, COVID, the EU decided this unprecedented program that we call Next Generation EU, and the amount of this program is quite huge, 800 billion euros. So it is comparable. If we take, we have also thresholds in these programs for the green and the digital investments. If we compare this amount of money, they are comparable. The problem is that, in my view, but this is my view, and we need a lot of conversation in the European institution to reach, to go there, is that when this Next Generation EU program will be expiring, which is in 2026, the clean technology global race will not be finished, and the need to support some common projects, so not to trigger a subsidies race, but to support some projects needing the European scale and the European added value, this need will persist also after 2026. And in the Commission, we are starting to discuss how to address this new challenge of the era that will start after the end of Next Generation EU Special Fund.
Maybe I could follow on that. The euro is, in my opinion, a great success for the European Union and its internal market. But will it be possible to continue with the common monetary policy in the European Union without a further coordination or harmonization of the member states' fiscal policies?
Well, you are asking the
Sorry.
Well, definitely, yes, we need a stronger coordination of fiscal policies. We have, as you know, 20 out of 27 European countries, and soon maybe 21 out of 27 with the same currency, with the same bank deciding on interest rates, etc. And we have a good coordination of fiscal policies, but we have 21 or 27 different fiscal policies. This contradiction, I think, is something that we can face, but gradually we will need to strengthen our coordination. And this is, I think, inevitable. What we did after COVID, which was to raise in financial markets funds as European Commission, is something that is one shot. It will finish in 2026, and this is clear, but it is also clear that this method could be interesting in the future, again, for common goals and shared objectives.
Thank you.
To come back to the global political situation that you also described as more fragmented, and also when we're talking about the IRA, there is an election coming up in the United States next year. And I would like you to comment a bit on how do you evaluate the uncertainties about the global political situation, and you can include China and, of course, as you also mentioned a couple of times, the war in Ukraine.
Well,
lots of things.
We always refer to uncertainty. Maybe the uncertainty is not sufficiently describing the situation. I think we are in a very difficult and dangerous situation. And it is very important, I think, on our side, I mean the European Union, first to continue to support Ukraine. And this should happen also in the coming years. I hope that the fact that in US electoral year will start will not undermine support to Ukraine, because the issue could become controversial. And I hope that in Europe we will keep our unity in supporting Ukraine. At the same time, we have to play our role in all the crises in the world, especially in the crisis that is going on in Gaza and Israel. Being very clear in condemning the terrorist attack of Hamas, in stressing the importance for Israel to defend itself, but also in stressing the need to respect the laws of the war and humanitarian laws. And second, and here you have an enormous tradition in Norway and in this city, to give our contribution to build a peace solution in the Middle East and for Israel and Palestine. Because if we are not, as Europeans, active also in this theater of war, I think this indirectly will weaken also our point on the Ukrainian crisis, especially in the global south. We should be very attentive to not give the impression that Ukraine is at the center of our initiative because we are neighbors and other wars or conflicts are not. Of course, we are neighbors and Ukraine will be part of the European family sooner or later. But at the same time, if we want to have a geopolitical European Union, and as Europeans, overall we should address the crisis going on in Israel and Gaza.
How would you then describe, as you did, the relations between Norway and the EU, and also maybe have some comments about how you think it will develop over the coming years?
Well, I think they are I don't want to offend anyone, but I think that they are the best relations we have with a non-EU member. We have very good relations with a lot of countries, from Switzerland to UK, which is no more a EU country. But Norway is so important for the European Union for at least 3 reasons. First, energy. I mentioned before the fact that from Norway we now reach more than 40% of the pipeline gas. We pay for it. It's not for free, but it is, of course, essential for our energy mix. The second reason is geopolitical reason. It's the high north, the Arctic, the role that Norway, with the Scandinavian countries and the Baltic countries, have to play in this region, a region that will become more and more strategic in the coming years and decades. And the third one, of course, is that we completely share values. From time to time, I would say there is not the same clarity on these values in some of our member states. It is very, very strong in Norway, and so we are very close friends and not only allies.
Do you have a question? And then for the audience
yes,
here,
I think we can open
for questions. Well, I think you can have one question, and then we will have one from the audience. So please go ahead, Jan Erik, and then from the audience afterwards.
Shall we take one more?
Yes, please.
Yes. I know as a European Commissioner you can't really say anything good about your own country, but the Italian economy is quite innovative. Create not only Italian design, but good industrial products. The tiles in my home are from Italy, etc., etc. How can we make the European economy just as innovative as your economy?
Well, thank you for that. And, I think that in different domains, several European countries are extraordinarily innovative. What we should do, in my view, more is to incentivize together innovation. We have, it depends if you look backwards, well, you made a lot of progress. Now this, for example, this program that we call Horizon Europe is, I think, one of the biggest programs of support of research and innovation in the world. And we could have several examples from space, activity, cooperation. At the same time, if you compare Europe to US, for example, you see that, well, we need to increase cooperation and cross-border support from universities to edging technologies. The idea that we can address these challenges each country autonomously is a good one. I think there is a lot that can be done from each country autonomously. But then there are some challenges that either you address them in common with the 500–600 million of consumers and of, that are there, or at the end you will be lagging behind.
Yeah.
And the challenge is, of course, also coming from China. So the point is, how can we make stronger together our capacity of innovation without a burden of bureaucracy, national state subsidies that are not so interesting for innovation. So it's a difficult challenge, but I think we can't accept the idea of not addressing this challenge.
Thank you.
Now we'll go for a question from the audience, and while we have these questions, you other people here, if you might want to ask something, you just raise your hand and I will try to note you down. So first here is Arne Melchior from NUPI.
Okay, so I can go here. Yes, so Mr. Gentiloni, thanks for your interesting remarks and presentation. I certainly agree with the balanced European approach to the global versus European issues, integration. So I'm an economist, researcher at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. One of my first research fields was about the internal market when it was established. Now I am writing an article about the 30-year anniversary of the EEA. And I'm writing that there were 23 happy years and then 7 years of shocks with Trump, with Brexit, with COVID, with war, and with polarization. So I will ask some questions related to the field of subsidies, which was already raised by Mr. Grindheim. I think before Trump, there was a process in the OECD and worries about subsidies in China. So some firms in China have very deep pockets, so because of the funding structure in China. So, but there was a process ongoing, and now, so my impression was that there was some progress. But then you had the IRA in USA, and you have, of course, the European response in a way to Invest EU and new policies. So my first question is there still a hope to work for kind of global rules and global regulations and kind of taming subsidies rather than ending in a race? So my question, second question is about Norway's relation to industrial subsidies, because in Norway we have this emerging debate about the EEA facing all these shocks. New things happen and you have new policies in many fields, and we ask, is the EEA still apt for the challenge? Is it fit for not 55 but years ahead? So, so my question then is about Invest EU and these important projects of common European interests, which is one of the new buzzwords, the IPCEI. So Norway is in the Invest EU, and Norway can participate. So my question is, generally, is Norway an equal partner or an almost equal partner? This relates to the political process. For example, it involves governments, and for example, there were informal ministerial meetings overcoming some of the shortage of the EEA, that Norway is not involved in the political process. Second, there is the issue about budgets. In the guidelines from 21 on these new projects, it says that EU funding is an advantage in a way, but it's mainly about national funding. But will EU budgets play a role in industrial policies, and is that a kind of challenge for EEA participation in this? So perhaps I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And you got the questions.
I answered, yes.
Yes.
Well, I am quite confident on the fact that we will not see the end of globalization. I think I share the concern. There was a paper from the IMF 1 or 2 years ago on the economic costs of the so-called decoupling that was showing very well how this is not an advantage, but I think in my view, but in the view of several experts, it is also not a realistic perspective, not only a mistake. So I am, from a certain point of view, optimistic on the global evolution. Trade is there. At the same time, my optimism is not so strong to reach the hope of global solutions for trade relations. We, the European Union, we are working hard to try to continue the path that was followed in the last 20 years of agreements, trade agreements. Not easy. I hope that we can reach results with Mercosur, but the negotiation, I see several ambassadors of Latin American countries. I know how controversial is the issue, of course. We will have a free trade agreement with New Zealand, which is good. We are working hard with Australia, but not sure that this could be done in the coming weeks. And at global level, what we are trying to do with China is to keep relations limiting the unfair situation that we inherited in trade with China. Again, probably we were a little bit too optimistic until a few years ago. So I think we have to prevent crisis, to avoid wars of subsidies or of tariffs, to strengthen the role of WTO. But telling this, I'm not so optimistic to say that we will have a global trade agreements regulating everything, because unfortunately, also politically, the trend is a trend of where also protectionism is there. I think the EEA is fit for purpose. As always, you can have better solutions, but it's always wise to avoid, in search of better solution, to undermine the existing solution. I think that EEA allowed us to have good relations. Of course, good relations needs to be cultivated. Also, I hear frequently criticism in saying, okay, we should be more involved in the political process, and this is true. Our answer cannot be, yes, enter in the Union, so you will be involved. No, the answer should be, this relation politically need to be strongly cultivated, because, of course, the decision that the European Union take needs to be very well known by our stronger partners. And of course, I'm fully in line on the fact that when we say funding industrial policy, we need to have in the horizon the chance to fund some projects of industrial policy in common. let me just finish with an example. We have this enormous next generation EU program, 800 billion euros. But the cross-border dimension of this is very limited. So these funds are going to member states. And member states are obliged to reach thresholds, targets, to identify priorities established in common. But then these are not funding common projects. So again, I think there is merit in having common projects funded, and the merit goes beyond the 27 EU member states because it involves also our partners, especially in the European Economic Area.
Thank you.
We have a question from a young lady, Kristin Meek Stokke, from the European Movement Youth, and then I've noted two more.
Thank you very much. Mr. Commissioner, thank you very much for your brilliant reflections here today. My name is Kristine Stokke. I am the former president of the European Youth Movement here in Norway. Having devoted the last 6 years of my 22-year-long life to the EU cause here in Norway, I've heard a lot about the youth's demand for the future of Europe and the future of the EU. And I would like to hear your and the Commission's perspective on this as well. Therefore, my question is, as the younger generation, my generation, grows up, starts to enter politics, the Parliament, the Commission, what do you think their demands will be for the European Union? What causes do you believe will be important to them? Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner.
Well, I think, first of all, if we look to the future of the European Union, and so to the younger generation, I think there is, first of all, something very important from the past that we should consider, which is peace. The European Union is a project for peace. It was born initially among France and Germany after these two countries made 3 wars. 2 of them becoming world wars in the previous century. And this process began, these 2 countries, with Italy and the 3 countries that were called, when I was young, Benelux, so Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Then now we discuss, and it will be a long and difficult process, of a possible EU at 30 plus something. Because, as you know, we have several candidates countries, and we recently decided to open negotiation with 3 new countries, Ukraine, Moldova, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Well, it's again about peace, because then this enlargement, if you look to this enlargement from Spain and Portugal to the eastern former Soviet countries, to the former Yugoslavian countries, to those that are now in the process, it's about peace. It's peace and liberty and democracy and rule of law expanding in Europe. In my view, this is by far the main perspective that we have. Then I think we have a substantial result of, well, we call it welfare state. You can call as you want, the social market economy. This is very strong European result. Not only the European Union, no, but it's a European product. Does it work? It works. I think the pandemic crisis showed us how much it works. It has its costs, of course, but I think We should be proud of this. To keep this peace, freedom, well-being of almost 500 million citizens, and maybe more in the future, we need stronger institutions. And this brings to the discussion on the role of the institution, the role of the Parliament. Yesterday or 2 days ago, the European Parliament voted a resolution on the need to change the treaties in some aspects to make our decision process stronger. We all know in the room, also you know very well because you follow the EU debate, how difficult is the European decision-making process. A very good friend of Europe, Timothy Garton Ash, defined the decision-making in Europe like a instruction booklet for washing machine to explain how difficult it is, how complex it is. But is the decision-making in our main partner and friend, US, easy? Apparently not. So please address the complexity of the mechanisms that we have in Europe, knowing that in democracies, simple processes are very rare. In autocracies, it's easier. There is only one person deciding, but normally it's not for the good.
Questions. One there first, and then secondly, there's another one behind, but I think go for the lady here first, please. And then you afterwards.
I'm Anne Levine from JCI Norway, and I wanted to ask a question regarding innovation and regulation. Because in the European Union there is lots of regulations, and usually innovation process it requires lots of chaotic movements. So do you have any idea how it will be solved to stay competitive?
Well, you will not reach, of course, by definition, breakthrough in innovation through regulation. No? Regulation is giving you a framework. We need this framework of rules. But innovation has always a disruptive component. And here, what probably we miss in the European Union is, again, a level of integration in our capital markets, allowing this disruption to be funded. Because too frequently we see that big innovation that we have in some European countries are not always matching with financing and with the financial markets, which is much, much weaker than in US. So innovation is flourishing in universities, in small and medium enterprises, in research. What we need to do is to find ways to make it stronger also in financing. And regulation is needed. Overall, I'm quite proud of the level of regulation that I found in the European Commission. They are very clever. They could regulate whatever, and in a very good way. And frequently, these regulations become global standard, from privacy to So this is good, but this is not a guarantee for innovation, of course. This is needed in our society, because it's also a way to strengthen equality and not inequality if things are regulated.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience, and then finally one from my colleague here before we end. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Frisvold. I'm the International Secretary of the Norwegian Green Party. Thank you for coming to Oslo, Mr. Commissioner. You mentioned that Norway played a key role in replacing, and a vital role in replacing Russian gas after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our question now is, for how long will the EU need Norwegian gas?
That's a good question. Well, we describe gas as a transition source. Just to give you a reference, but probably you know this very well, when we decided this big funding, Next Generation EU, funding of projects connected to gas were not allowed, because the message was, yes, we will need gas as a transition towards renewables, but we should not fund this transition. Then the Russian invasion came, and we adapted this program. We created a new program that we call Repower EU, where some aspects, for example, gasification infrastructure, transforming LNG, are financed at European level. But we are very restrictive in financing this. Of course, not because we think that in a couple of years or in 5 years we will go out from fossil fuels. This is not what it is. But because we should be aware of the fact that the sooner the better, and so the investment have to be concentrated on renewables and the energy of the future, on carbon capture, etc., etc., etc. We have also, I think, a further incentive as European Union, which is the fact that the cost of energy for us, and I mean gas and oil energy, is a competitive disadvantage in relation to other industrial players. And this, of course, is no more at the level of autumn 2022, where gas prices were 10 times the previous prices, but gas prices are still the double than they were a few years ago. And this creates for the EU industry a competitive disadvantage in relation with other global players. So we have a further incentive. So I know that there are experts that are giving also answers in terms of how many years to your question, but this is not exactly my role, so I wouldn't say how long. But for sure, it's a transition. And in this transition, we will need gas and diversified gas. And we are very happy to have this agreement with Norway, and to have with Norway a so to say, double-track agreement. From one side, we receive plenty of pipe gas from Norway. On the other side, we work, the EU and Norway, on renewables, on rare minerals, on batteries, so on the future, because the future is something we have to work on. now.
Final question.
Yeah,
here.
thank you, Mr. Gentiloni. I have a short question at the end. In 1861, when Italy was assembled, Cavour said, "We have made Italy. Now we have to make Italians." When can we say the same about Europe?
For the Europeans, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, I think it is a little bit the opposite. We have the Europeans, now we have to build a stronger Europe, because the feeling of being Europeans is so strong, but at the same time, we need to bring this process forward. And I know very well how popular is the quote from Jean Monnet, the Europe is built through crisis. I would like that Europe made in the coming years some progress also without major crises, no? Because indeed we had 2 black swans in the last years, and the reaction to these black swans made possible to make progress. I hope we could be able to make progress also without major crises in the coming years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you all very much for coming today, and a warm thanks to you. Grazie mille.
Thank you.